the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have, what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war, the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe, and yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Well, that's one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard. And I have heard that before from people who would know, figured Stephen Yates is about as good a person you can ask about these things as anyone around. Joining me now, national security expert with the Heritage Foundation, Stephen Yates. Okay, Stephen, I have heard this before, that we have a carrier-based Navy, carrier-based military, you could make the argument, and that China is attempting to, or has already succeeded, depending on who you're talking to, come up with something that will simply erase these things and sweep them off the chessboard. What's going on?
Well, now Secretary of Defense Hegseth was absolutely correct. We've had this back and forth in Congress and in the media for a very, very long time. There's several annual reports that commissions put out, that committees on the Hill put out, that have always noted that China's military capabilities were, as Pete Hegseth stated, aimed at defeating the United States, and that they were using comprehensive national power to do that, and that their manufacturing supply chains were racing far ahead of our previous estimates in doing so. The United States, as Secretary Hegseth was noting, has been just tragically slow to come up with what's our concept of warfare in this new era. But then our manufacturing supply chains have been woefully slow, corrupted, I would argue, and inadequate to the cause.
Okay, that's a lot. Let's focus on us right now. Why are we so slow in coming up with this? Is this just a change in administrations? Not that I want to be a dirty communist like China, but having that consistency does help maintaining one foreign policy vision. Is it that? What is it? Why have we been slow?
Well, I would argue that there's a part of this that's strategic, and that's the part that changes in administration can sometimes help, where you have to get out of the mindset of winning the last war and get dialed into what are the current challenges facing us, and we have new tools. And so this administration has a unique opportunity with incredibly different people from tech and manufacturing and investment backgrounds that should, under the right circumstances with the right oomph, be able to revolutionize our supply chains and deploy tech-assisted new forms of warfare that should make things harder for China. So we get past that carrier-based approach that we've had basically since World War II and onward. So that's one piece. The manufacturing part, though, that's where the swamp thing has been the problem, where there's huge vested interests that constantly deliver things late and over budget. We have allies that have already paid, and they're waiting years after targets to receive deterrent that would help avoid Americans having to intervene. And then there's the disservice to ourselves, falling behind on the number of ships and planes and other things that we should have for our own national interests.
Stephen, people who pay attention to the budget and spending, when they hear people say what you just said, which is true, that we're falling behind on planes and ships and things like that, they look at the budget and they ask the question I'm about to ask you. How can that possibly be? How can we not have the most state-of-the-art ships in the world right now, given the ridiculous military budget we have? If it's not going to the ships, where is it going?
Well, I think it comes down to corruption, inefficiency, and bureaucracy, which may all be three ways of saying the same thing. But that ultimately, I think, has been the Achilles heel of the sole remaining superpower. It's why I think that we have a generational opportunity that we need to seize, because if we miss it, I think that the republic is at risk in this DOGE effort, and it's got to focus on redoing these manufacturing supply chains, specifically in the Pentagon and the Beltway bandits, who have fueled those supply chains for decades. That's where Elon Musk showed he was able to outmatch NASA's bureaucracy and putting important technology into space. We need to mirror that kind of effort inside government. They'll meet with resistance, but that's where the pit bull in chief needs to come in, and the richest man in the world and others need to weigh in to carve out this new opportunity.
Let's go back to China, because that's really what we're talking about here. Tell me about these missiles, these hypersonic missiles. Do we have countermeasures? What else is China doing that concerns you?
Well, in short, China's doing everything. And it's kind of a joke, but it's a very serious situation. They are investing in everything, human intelligence to cyber capabilities to space assets. They're investing in things that would defeat our core capabilities. They've gone very, very far ahead in bio warfare and chemical warfare. They don't really have the ethical restraints and accountability restraints that we have in our systems. And so they've been pushing ahead in everything. And they've also compromised our homeland security in any number of ways, from the border to all kinds of entities that are psychologically damaging to our youth. It's another discussion on social media apps, perhaps. But they have had a comprehensive approach. And they don't really see a pushback coming from the United States until perhaps now. This is where President Trump has the opportunity to reset this narrative of America on decline and China on the rise, and somehow that's inevitable. I think China's got some problems, and if Trump gets America back on the right footing in defense and otherwise, we have this golden age he's talked about that will have to recalibrate what China's calculus is.
What problems do they have right now, Stevens? It's easy when you look at the length and breadth of everything they're doing that it's easy to just think, oh my gosh, it is, the rising sun, if you'll pardon the pun. But they do have major problems too. What are they?
They do. And one of the things that we can't kind of bank our lives on, but it's been a reality in every other conflict, is they have a very large military order of battle when it's on paper, but it is profoundly untested against peer or better enemy combatants. And when you look at what the Iraqi National Guard was going into the first Gulf War and later, and when you look at what Russia's prohibitive military capability was going into Ukraine, these big powers, I think, have to be somewhat humble about what reality is when they have to grind into actual combat. And so there's that reality that comes into play. And China's not known for quality control. They are known for manufacturing at speed and volume. And if things break, so be it, and their people are expendable, well, their people might not like that, and they might not be as sustainable in conflict as they think going into it. Their people might not be on board with sacrificing so much if they aren't convinced that it was absolutely necessary.
These big powers like China and Russia, they stumble walking into things like Ukraine. What is it that makes them stumble? Is it the logistics? Do they not have the people they think? Does their equipment just suck? You can certainly see that being a problem for China. What is it that makes them stumble?
Well, I think one part of it is a reality that you know very well. It's a lot easier to hit back, to attack, to try to break something, to thwart something than it is to invade, occupy, and hold a different territory. And that doesn't matter whether that is over air, sea, or land. It is just a fundamental reality. If you have people and material that's positioned in a way to resist, and there is a resiliency to that supply, it's tough. And so I think when you look at when Russia went into Ukraine, you had Granny with a gun willing to use it. That made some difference. But you also just had this reality they could take some of that territory in their near abroad, but they met with a resistance that has sustained for years. Ukraine still paid a dear price. If China moved against Taiwan, that would be a price that no one really wants to have to pay. But China is untested in trying to see how much they would really be willing to pay if they met with resistance. And if Japan, Taiwan, the United States, and others were serious about capabilities that degraded China in its own territory, I think alters the calculus. I think we have frankly been fighting with hands tied behind our backs with theories of the past, and that has enabled China to get, I think, a little bit too much hubris.
Finally, Stephen, let's talk about Japan really quickly. Ever since World War II, obviously, there have been limits on what they're allowed to do, but what are they? I know they're not China. What are they? What are their capabilities? I know they're a valuable ally in all this.
Well, they are very good at manufacturing. They are very, I think, good at quality control in contrast to China. They have had, as you allude, some constraints that have been placed upon them, some that they've put on themselves to be committed to just pure self-defense. But former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the late Prime Minister, he began to change their way of thinking about defense and recognizing that they needed to have sort of active self-defense, which was a euphemism for we're going to be able to be a more normal country and punch beyond our territorial waters and airspace when needed. And I think it's a good thing for the United States and the world to have a responsible stakeholder like Japan, which they may be a lethargic economy, but they're still very big, and they're a significant country, and they have significant capabilities. They also have historic ties to places like Taiwan that are underappreciated, and that's why I think China has to be very careful. It's not just the United States that might have a national interest in engaging. Japan and others may too, and so that's what makes this less of a cakewalk. We can't bank on that. No one should take it easy or lightly. But I think China, if they're sober about this, should be more cautious than they've been.
I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.